It is said that every empire has its ghost. And Tughlaqabad is no exception. Among the many legends that linger here, one tale stands out, a tale of ambition, defiance, and a curse that would echo through the centuries. They say every great ruler faces a reckoning, and for Sultan Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, it came in the form of a single phrase. A phrase spoken not with anger, but with quiet conviction. Who knows Delhi durast? Yet, Delhi is far away. Tughlaqabad Fort, a silent sentinel of history, and a testament to the Tughlaq dynasty's ambitious legacy. Today, the modern neighborhood of Tughlaqabad hums with life. Busy streets and homes have risen around the ruins, creating a stark contrast between the thriving present and the decaying remnants of a grand past. Born as Ghazi Malik, the son of a Hindu Jat woman and a Turk father, he was a man of humble origins, yet destined for greatness. Raised amidst the turbulence of the Khilji Sultanate, he quickly rose to prominence as a formidable general, known for his military genius and unmatched skill in battle.
Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq was in the employ of the Khiljis. So one day he, with the last of the Khilji rulers, he's a senior commander, and the king decides to inspecting his territories around Delhi. And they come to this place which has two hills and a lake in the middle. And he turns to the king and he says, what a phenomenal location to set up a fort. And apparently the king is not very excited. He is quite cut up actually. Why didn't I think of this? That the king turns to Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq and he says, when you become king, you can build your palace there. And that apparently gave an idea to Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, and he conspired to get rid of the.
He was an ordinary soldier, Ghazi Malik, who had once gone with the Sultan Alauddin Khilji's son, and said that this is a very beautiful place to build, a correct place to build a fort in. And the son said that when you become Sultan, you build it.
Scholars argue that the primary reason for choosing this location was not mere ambition or inspiration, but military strategy and the pursuit of power. The fort's design, with its towering walls and strategic positioning, was driven by the need for defense, control, and dominance over the surrounding region.
Every fort was built on the same principles of strength and protection. It was a fort by the name fort means, Qila means that it is built for a defensive reason.
The fort of Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq is not just a fort. It is not just a palace for the king. It is a fortified city. And obviously the idea was to build a city that was impregnable, that could not be attacked. That's why it was located on top of a hill. And it had one huge lake on one side, so it could not be invaded from that side. So that is why they built it there. Designed in such a way that it could withstand a siege of 2 years. If an invading army came and surrounded the fort, the entire palace and the city had enough grain and water to last them for 2 years.
Delhi during this time was a city divided 5 or 6 distinct districts scattered along the Jamna River, all eventually united by the creation of Jahanpana. Delhi has long been a city of shifting capitals, with each new ruler leaving behind his mark in the form of a new city.
There are at least 7 recorded cities. Romantically, it's called 7. And Tughlaqabad was the third. The first city to be built was Lal Kot, which was built by the Tomars in Mehroli. After that, Alauddin Khilji built the city of Siri, which is present-day Hauz Khas. And that was a defensive city to protect the city of that time, the Darul Hukumat, from the Mongols. So that was Siri, and then after that, Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq built Tughlaqabad. His son built Jahanpana, and Firoz Shah built Tughlaqabad. So that is 5, and then 6th is Din Pana or Shergarh of Humayun and Sher Shah Suri, and the last is Shah Jahanabad built by Shah Jahan.
3 major Tughlaq kings, 3 capitals. In Tughlaqabad, you have 2 forts. You have Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq's, and there is the residence of Muhammad bin Tughlaq across, which is known as Adilabad. Now we hear references to a structure called Qasr-e-Hazar Sutun, the palace of 1,000 pillars, which Muhammad bin Tughlaq is supposed to have built at Adilabad. Before that, we hear of a Qasr-e-Hazar Sutun built in Siri by Alauddin Khilji, which inspires the second Qasr-e-Hazar Sutun by Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Then Muhammad bin Tughlaq shifts his capital and builds a new one called Jahanpana. That is where the third Qasr-e-Hazar Sutun believes to have come up. Now, in the last excavation at Vijay Mandal, which was the palace of Muhammad bin Tughlaq, they have found pillar bases, 2 rows of pillar bases with circular holes in the middle, and the archaeologists are of the opinion that that is where wooden pillars were fixed, and a structure made of wood, which could have been 2-story, 3-story height, large number of wooden pillars, one floor, then wooden pillars, another floor, like that. And that was described by some court poet or writer as Qasr-e-Hazar Sutun.
One of the most striking features of Tughlaqabad fort is its sloping walls, a hallmark of Tughlaq architecture. These walls, designed with a steep incline, served not just as defense mechanism, but also as a symbol of strength and stability.
The style of the walls leaning away from you, they are always broad based from the foundation, and then they lean. So you can imagine that they will end if they continue to grow in the shape of a pyramid.
One of the features of Tughlaq architecture in general is sloping walls. They are, in architectural terminology, it is called a batter. These are battered walls. So, in Tughlaqabad fort, you will see the walls are not straight. They slope quite a bit. And there's a strategic reason for that also. It's much more difficult to lean a ladder against a sloping wall. So if an enemy is trying to get inside, it's more difficult for them to put those ladders to scale it. But Tughlaq did something very interesting. Apart from the fact that the fort walls were sloping, they used that sloping feature in their other buildings also. So if you look at, say, Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq's tomb, which is there in the Tughlaqabad complex, you will see that the tomb also has sloping walls.
If you look at any Tughlaq structure, even the broken walls of Tughlaqabad, you look at them from a distance, they appear to be extremely solid, firm, and they give you an idea of permanence. Now, this is probably the message that the Tughlaqs wanted to communicate. We are here for good. And this empire is going to last forever. They appear as if they are very firmly rooted in the ground, that they have grown from this soil, and nothing can move them. The empire did not last for too long, but the architecture did.
The creation of Tughlaqabad was nothing short of an engineering marvel. Ghiyasuddin's vision was as grand as the stone that would build it. The foundations were laid in 1321, and what followed was a monumental effort, one that would demand the labor of thousands and the ingenuity of the age's finest architects. The walls of Tughlaqabad were built with blocks so large and heavy that it said only the strength of the greatest men could move them. These stones were quarried from the surrounding hills, transported through a vast network of roads and ramps, and placed by hand with precision.
The material for building the fort It came from the site itself. Because the fort was built on this huge rocky hill, it's the rocks of the hill which were cut and made into the fort. So it kind of grew from the place itself.
Well, there are various theories. One is that it was the stone would be, you put ropes around it and you make a sling which passes through a huge bamboo. And that bamboo is carried on the shoulders of people and the stone hangs in the middle. And maybe 5-10 people did carry it like that. The other was 3 bamboos fixed like that, and you had pulleys with which you lift it. The third was a ramp. The ramp was built, and then it was, when the structure came up, then it was disassembled.
According to Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, the fort was completed in just 2 years, a remarkable feat. Given its immense scale and solid construction, the speed and precision of its creation speak to the determination and vision of the Sultan Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq. Historian Carl Stephens, referencing Jaron Cunningham, notes that some stones measured an astonishing 14 feet long, 2.5 feet wide, and 2.2 inches thick, with a weight of over 6 tons. The effort required to move and position such stones was immense, a testament to the ingenuity and sheer labor involved in the fort's construction.
How they used to make a building like this was they used the stones and they stuck them together using what we call today limestone mortar. And that limestone mortar, it contained limestone and it contained things like brick dust. It contained a lot of organic materials like cow dung, like good jaggery, and urad dal, methi, bale pulp. You know, the bale fruit, it's got a hard shell and it has a very sticky pulp. So all of these things were mixed together to make a mortar that was very strong.
Unlike the Mughal forts that came later, adorned with intricate carvings, calligraphy, and decorative marble inlays, Tughlaqabad is devoid of ornamentation. Its architecture is austere, built for defense, not display.
Carving was impossible on Delhi quartz. And throughout the Sultanate period, the major building material is the Delhi quartz. That is the stone that we excavate in Delhi from the Aravalli. It can't be carved. Except for rough etchings, nothing else is possible.
The walls that surrounded Tughlaqabad are simply unparalleled. So wide and expansive, they provide enough space for horsemen and infantry to march from one end of the city to the other. Sir Syed mentions that Tughlaqabad once contained 56 court and 52 gates, each designed to fortify the city and control access. Over time, numerous bastions and gates have protected the fort. Some still stand there, but continuing the exact number that remains is a challenge. While General Cunningham noted 13 gates, the true number, whether 56 or 133, remains elusive.
The 13 gates are actually mentioned in Bashiruddin Ahmad's book. And what we see now is gate known as the Nai Ka Pole, and there is Dhobi Ka Pole, and etc., which are probably names given much later.
Many different numbers of gates, etc. are shown. What does happen is that these days, because when you actually go to examine the site, you may not find that those many gates are there. And the reason for that is very simple. It could be, on the one hand, that things have changed.
Historians highlight one of the most fascinating aspects of Tughlaqabad, the causeway that once connected the Grand Fort to the tomb of Sultan Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq. Surrounded by water, This connection was a striking feature of the Sultan's vision, symbolizing both power and legacy.
So the most interesting part of Tughlaqabad that is now available to us is causeway which connected the fort to the tomb. And the tomb may also have been where Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq and Muhammad bin Tughlaq are buried. And that could have been at that time some kind of a pleasure garden or whatever. It was connected by a causeway and there was water all around it. The bridge is still there, but it's now there's a road which runs over it.
Tughlaqabad Fort holds many secrets, and among its most intriguing features are its underground spaces. Historians suggest that what many call tunnels are actually functional structures designed for specific purposes.
One of the things that people think is a tunnel is some underground spaces which are in the Ghiyasuddin tomb complex. Now, those are not specifically tunnels. You have some passages which lead to the underground place where the grave is. In all of these kind of tombs, the grave, of course, is in the earth, right? And then there are also in that same complex, as well as in the main fort, there are some underground grain pits also. Because remember, this was meant as a place to secure the army, secure the population if there was an enemy which was standing outside.
Within the walls of Tughlaqabad Fort, the Meena Bazaar stood as a vibrant heart of commerce and culture. Its strategic placement within the fort emphasized the Tughlaq dynasty's vision of creating a self-sufficient, thriving city. While time has striped away the colors and sounds of the Meena Bazaar, its remnants still whisper stories of a once thriving hub of trade and life within the fort. Today, visitors can walk these ancient pathways, imagining the energy and vibrancy that once defined this iconic marketplace. While the Tughlaqs fortified their empire with walls and armies, another force was at work in Delhi. A contemporary of Sultan Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, Sheikh Nizamuddin Aulia, withdrew from the material world, preaching a message of prayer, renunciation, and universal compassion. To his followers, he offered a path of spiritual cleansing, purging the soul of evil through selflessness and devotion to God. The friction came to a head when the Sultan's demand for laborers to complete his ambitious city conflicted with the Sheikh's efforts to build a stepwell for his community. This labor dispute was seen by some as a direct challenge to the Sultan's authority.
When Nizamuddin Aulia asked his disciple, Nasiruddin, to build a step well in the area which is now known as Nizamuddin, which was then known as Ghiyaspura, named after Ghiyasuddin Balban. This is the same time Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq is building his fort. So there is a shortage of construction labor. So apparently Nasiruddin works out an arrangement with the labor working, building the fort of Ghiyasuddin. He tells them, you work here during the day and then you for the night you come to Ghiyaspura and help me build the stepwell. And it is quite some distance from Ghiyasuddin's fort, from Tughlaqabad to Nizamuddin, because the labor was shifting at night and their efficiency was greatly reduced the next day. Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq stops the sale of oil. Apparently, Nasiruddin he asked for all the torches to be collected, took them to a room and took them out, and he said, now light them, and they lit. Water of the well catches fire. And when the rumor reached Nizamuddin Aulia, he gave a new title to Nasiruddin, and he became Nasiruddin Roshan Chiraghe Delhi.
Historians argue that this clash was not merely about labor, but symbolized a deeper conflict between temporal power and spiritual influence.
Historically, it is the kings who were always afraid of these Sufis.
Nizamuddin Aulia was never one to shy away from controversy. A firm believer in the power of music and poetry to lead devotees towards spiritual ecstasy. He clashed with the orthodox mullahs of Delhi's mosques, who viewed his practices as heretical. Jealous of his growing following, the mullahs summoned him before Sultan Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, accusing him of heresy. Yet, with his eloquent preaching, Nizamuddin managed to escape the trap laid for him.
While talking to one of the Sajjada Nasheens of the Dargah, Hazrat Nizamuddin Aulia's descendants, Sayyid Farid Nizami, he said that there was an occasion on which, as you may, most people will know, that the Chishti Silsila is very fond of Sama music, and that's one of their ways of reaching, closeness to the divine, to God. So they use Qawwali as a medium of reaching up to God, or nearness to Him, unity with Him. So this is something that the Qaziul Mulk of the time under Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq did not approve of, and he sent summons to Hazrat Nizamuddin to come to the court and explain it. He went there and he cited a hadith. I think it's hadith number 907 of Sahih Bukhari, where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam permitted his wife Aisha to listen to some music. And he told that she wanted to listen to some music, and to let her listen to the music, he told her father and others who were scolding her. And there are certain instruments that are only certain instruments that are permitted. So within those constraints, and that is how the Qawwalis were done. And so he said that, and the Qazi apparently said that Abu Hanifa, or one of the founders of the school of jurisprudence, has said this. And the saint got up and said, in a place where somebody else's testimony is considered above the Prophet's, is not the place where I want to be. And he said, because whatever the Prophet says is the ultimate. So he got up from there, and they say that is a time when he cursed the court.
The famous curse, stating that either jackals would howl or Gujjar herdsmen were to graze their animals at Tughlaqabad, is said to have been a reflection of this tension. After Ghiyasuddin's death, the capital shifted, and Tughlaqabad was abandoned, a fate that some argue fulfilled the prophecy.
Apparently irked by this tension, this constant needling, Nizamuddin is supposed to have cursed the fort and said, either the Gujar will graze his animals here, or the jackals will howl. That is all that will happen. And that is what has been happening, because after Ghiyasuddin's death, the son shifted the capital and built a new capital. So that place was deserted. Now what you get to see in Tughlaqabad is less than 20% of the total fort. 80% has been taken over, and other people are living there and all that.
Historians suggest that this clash was less about religious practices and more a reflection of the political tensions between the saint's influence and the sultan's growing authority.
He had also once, when he is out to crush some rebellion, told Hazrat Nizamuddin Aulia to leave Delhi before he returns. Nizamuddin Aulia did not leave. And Nizamuddin Aulia kept on saying, Kunuz Delhi Durast. Muhammad bin Tughlaq apparently is a devotee of Nizam. And he perhaps sent word to Nizamuddin Aulia not to worry, that no harm will come to him. And probably Nizamuddin Aulia was in the knowledge that the son is now going to take over. Taking advantage of the absence of the father from Delhi, the son will take over. So that's why he did not leave. He stayed put.
Historians differ on the cause. Some blame a lightning strike, others suspect treachery. What remains certain is that the Sultan died embracing his son, a final act of love amidst tragedy.
By the time he approached Delhi, he was received and Delhi at that time was Tughlaqabad. By the time he reached there, he was welcomed by his son, taken to a gate which was Victory Arch that was made. There was a party there. And apparently the gate collapsed, and the only person who died was Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq.
Sultan Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq was laid to rest in the tomb he built for himself, a structure of red sandstone and white marble, known as Darul Aman, the abode of peace. It was one of the first monuments to blend these materials, crowned with a lotus-shaped finial. The tomb of Sultan Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq stands in a monumental expression of strength. Its almost pyramidal cube shape, built of thick red sandstone, is crowned with a dome of solid white marble, creating a striking contrast. The tomb is encircled by its own set of maculated walls, standing as an extraordinary protective feature, adding a sense of grandeur to the structure. In many ways, this tomb is a miniature expression of the entire fort. Within the tomb lie 3 graves: the Sultan himself, his wife Makhdoom-e-Jahan, and their son Muhammad bin Tughlaq, who would carry forward the dynasty's complex legacy. The Sultan's final resting place remains a testament to his architectural vision and devotion, a quiet counterpoint to the ambition of the city he left behind. With the death of Sultan Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, his son Muhammad bin Tughlaq ascended to the throne, ambitious and visionary. He sought to expand the empire beyond what his father had imagined. But his rule would mark the beginning of Tughlaqabad's downfall. Despite Sultan Muhammad bin Tughlaq's efforts to fortify the new city, the people preferred to stay in the old city near Qutub Minar and Mehroli.
Most of the people really wanted to live in the old city. Old city being the area around Qutub Minar, Mehroli. That was the place where most people lived. And even though the emperor had made this new city, Tughlaqabad, where he wanted everybody to shift and all that, people were not happy there.
Historians suggest that the abandonment of Tughlaqabad was due to several factors.
Because it was a dry, rocky place, water had to be got from the ground. They had water reservoirs and wells and all that, but water was a problem inside that fort.
The main reason is lack of water, because when you have such a huge city, if you walk inside, you will see that there is only one Bauli that we can find. There may have been other sources, but what people normally, historians, attribute it to is the lack of water. Also, the fact that after him, Muhammad bin Tughlaq just shifted everything first to Deccan, and then he came back and built his new city, Jahanpana.
The story of Tughlaqabad's preservation is as complex as its history.
In 1857, this was the property of Raja Nahar Singh of Ballabgarh. Raja Nahar Singh of Ballabgarh sided with Bahadur Shah Zafar in the uprising, and as a result, he was hung. His property would have been taken over by the British, and whatever other sites that are associated with 1857, whether it's in Lucknow or in Delhi, they were quite badly damaged. After that, once ASI was formed, the Archaeological Survey of India was not present in those days. It was formed much later. And when it was formed, then there was there's the famous Marshall Plan of Conservation, which is that you cannot renovate a building, you can only preserve it as is, where is condition. That means you cannot intervene.
To centuries of evolving use and settlement, the fort stands as a testament to the passage of time, but its future lies not just in preserving its walls, but in fostering a relationship between heritage and the communities it sustains.
So actually, the Archaeological Survey of India gets active in many of these structures very recently, whether it was the Khirki Mosque or it is the Begumpur Mosque. In many of these,
I personally feel that the way historic sites should evolve, there should be a dialogue between the people who live in the place and authorities such as ASI, who are supposed to manage it, to make sure that the historic character of the fort is managed properly. What happens there, what is allowed, what is not allowed, there should be dialogue and discussion as to what is the best way in which the historic character can be preserved.
Tughlakabad reminds us that history is not static, it is alive, shaped by those who walk its paths and protect its stories. Its preservation is a shared responsibility, ensuring that this monument continues to inspire generations to come.